Hello, welcome back to the SAP S4HANA podcast. Welcome to this episode. I'm Faisal, SAP consultant at PwC.
And I'm Thorsten Hübsch, partner at PwC and leading the SAP practice here in Belgium and also the European Center of Excellence for SAP Strategy. The link you will find in the show notes.
Today we explore where the SAP as the leading solution provider for ERP systems come from, how it is transforming and what this means for the SAP ERP customers who are facing an S4HANA transformation.
That's right, Faisal. Meeting a lot of customers recently who are basically overwhelmed by the changes coming up around the SAP ecosystem. So what we actually will do is we just summarize a bit where this organization is coming from, what is currently changing, but also a bit looking forward where SAP might be in the next 5 to 10 years. So maybe to start with that, SAP is actually a really amazing company. It's a company which already exists for more than 50 years. And even if you look in one of the most modern systems today in this fast changing environment, you will even see today basic elements that have not changed over the past 40 years and still keep stable in terms of structuring code, in terms of the coding language partly itself. So 50 years ago, there was a group of IBM people who left the company and started a pretty crazy idea. The idea was actually a product that came for free with the large mainframe systems to make that paid. So why would you actually buy a product that you could get for free? Well, this group around the founders of SAP was convinced they could make a product which delivers so much more value to the customer and that they could ask money for that. And now, 50 years later, we are actually with a company that has 390,000 customers in 193 countries in the world, and which is actually probably 70% of the worldwide transactions touching somewhere in one way or another, being on a financial basis or being in the procurement or in the sales, in the logistics. So if you just imagine what this is in terms of footprint worldwide, this is just amazing. In 1997, the first ERP system called R2 was starting. Then in 92, the R3 came up. And the R2 actually, or the R3 actually, the system has still traces today in today's environment when you look at some of the core functionalities. In 2015, then the new flagship came up, S4HANA system, which is within the community in the meantime widely known, is the new product, and let's say SAP ERP is going to be depreciated over the coming years. When it will be exactly, this is still not known yet. There are dates out, end 2027 for the normal maintenance and end 2030 for the, let's say, extended maintenance. But seeing how at the moment, basically the evolution is on the, let's say, adoption of these transformations, it will be technically and mathematically quite difficult to meet that deadline that has been set by SAP. But next to that solution evolution, we also have a fundamental change what SAP is as a solution provider itself. So SAP came from a time where they sold a DVD. The DVD then was shipped to the customer. The system was installed, and then this system, this solution started its own life on the customer side. Mm-hmm. SAP actually got an annual maintenance fee for providing updates, fixes, but also security patches or changes in localization. And that actually worked well for many years. But then at a certain moment, SAP had to think, how are we going to go forward? So, and SAP actually wants now to become the cloud company, urging their customers to move their solution either from their hosting providers or from their data center into a subscription model to SAP.
And talking about that certain change moment, why did SAP decide to do that?
Well, there was actually at SAP a big fear, and I think that was for good reason, that SAP would become the next Nokia. So the question was, will they stay relevant? Will they go with the market? Or would it be actually an outdated system that over years would lose market share and eventually be replaced by another solution that immediately would start in the cloud? Investors and analysts expected from SAP to have a clear strategy for the future. And then basically SAP said, our way to grow is to go for the trend in the cloud. So that's a bit the background on the why SAP transformed. We actually see something similar years back at Microsoft. Also there you had your software on your laptop, on your computer. And in the meantime, with Office 365, things are on a subscription model, completely integrated in the cloud.
But let me be honest with you, Torsten. You do not seem to be convinced by this strategy. Am I right?
Well, actually, Faisal, I think you have a point there. I'm not too much convinced if this strategy overall was the right one back in time. So SAP itself got with these maintenance fees quite a lucrative revenue stream from the product maintenance that every customer paid over year. And changing that now to the subscription-based model, there we actually have a different cost on the SAP side where they also need to run and operate the solution. And so whether from an, let's say, financial point of view, this was a good decision is still, let's say, a question that will be answered in the future. SAP actually takes a lot of responsibility. Instead of just shipping this DVD that I mentioned, they actually needed to do a huge investment and have high running costs. And there's the question whether these will be justified with the revenue development that we will see going forward. However, you know, Faisal, this is more my personal opinion. Customers should not be worried about this question. What's more important is that in an ERP investment here, it is pretty certain that SAP will also remain relevant, certainly over the next decade. And then it will basically spell out whether the move to the cloud was the right thing to do also for an ERP solution. Because let's face it, you can't compare an Office package with an ERP. We also see the latest disruption in the market, be it the Ukraine war, but also be it problems in the supply chain, where it's a question whether you really want to have a solution in the cloud or whether you also will, going forward, offer a solution that is then installed, for example, in Europe or in a certain country. And so from that perspective, I think by going only on a cloud, on a cloud model, I think we will see potentially in the future that at least a kind of a hybrid approach will be supported by SAP, allowing customers to go to the cloud, but also at the same time having a solution installed on their own systems.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your honest advice and opinion. Coming back to S/4HANA, another decision SAP made. Why did they go for it?
Yeah, that's also a very interesting question, actually, because customers back then, before S/4HANA came, they basically complained about one thing, and that was the usability. So basically, if we would have seen that SAP would have added a nice front end, I think the satisfaction of many customers would have been actually met. But what SAP basically did was a very technology-driven decision. And maybe already to jump ahead of the conclusion, I think the idea was correct. It was just that many other customers didn't ask for that. And actually, there's a nice anecdote that one of the founders, Hasso Plattner, was enjoying his vacation in the Hawaiian Bay by the name of HANA, surprise, and had actually the idea of a so-called memory database, allowing to store data in columns, which would actually increase the speed of accessing the data dramatically.
So there is basically now fast database underneath the ERP system, But talking for your customers, what is the advantage for them? What is the advantage for the customer?
Yeah, Faisal, this is really a good question, because in the beginning, when HANA was used for classic SAP ERP system that most customers are still using, by the way, this system received its latest and last update in 2016 with an enhancement pack 8. After that, there will not be any updates except of security patches and some bug fixes. There was actually not really an advantage. When posting an invoice or doing a month-end closing, you couldn't care less how fast your database is. It depends on how fast you can type your invoice and you can post it.
Mm-hmm.
The revolution, or I should better say the evolution, came actually with S/4HANA, so the successor product. So all the logic that has changed on an application level. So with this new speed of that database, SAP was allowed to fundamentally redesign their data model. So the beating heart of the new system is the so-called universal journal. That is nothing else than a gigantic table holding the majority of the finance data. So instead of digging through complex data models like in the past, you only have one single source of truth, combining finance, controlling, and other data from other domains. And this actually comes with another game changer that we have seen then also later on. In the past, your SAP ERP system was for all a transactional system. So you typed your documents, you posted your documents, created your purchase order. But whenever it came into analytics, at this moment, you tried to transfer your data into a dedicated, actually quite costly and complex data warehouse and run your reporting on top of it. And of course, you would have on the one hand side the data redundant. You have it in your SAP ERP, but also in your data warehouse. But for all the data are not real time anymore. They are maybe near time accurate. And with S/4HANA, this paradigm actually changes. So next to being able to hold, of course, your data from a transactional perspective, you can immediately also run your analytics on it. This is due to the extremely fast performance of this underlying database. And another big innovation is the actual ask from the customers. Please make my ERP system user-friendly again, or user-friendly at all. Because as I just heard from one of the CIOs lately, who I asked, why are you moving to S/4HANA? Why did you decide for that? He simply said they would not find any people who were wanting to work on Stone Age SAP systems with old, outdated user interfaces. This is a new generation which is used to iPhones, iPads, who want to check information on the coffee machine and not being stuck to a screen. And that was actually, this idea was then the starting point of the Fiori technology. Fiori being the new user interface technology that is basically allowing now in S/4HANA to execute pretty much all the functionality that is included in the system. And then last but not least, the S/4HANA, of course, becomes by that also an innovation platform. So in the past, we had very often the situation that real innovations happened then outside. We saw it already with IoT. So there, the SAP only received data from in a very, let's say, condensed way, but was not really actually using all the data, a massive amount of data that sensors would send them, simply because it was not capable of processing that much of data. And now with S/4HANA, we are in a completely different game. We have a database that can basically process as many data as you want. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. But also when we now look at all the AI use cases, all that is not possible to implement on an old ERP system. Here, it is definitely the way to go when moving to S/4HANA and getting the support also for these new technologies.
With you mentioning the evolution S4HANA and its innovations. Are you convinced that S4HANA is a good product?
That's another interesting question. And despite everything I said, I'm absolutely 100% convinced that S4HANA is an extremely competitive SAP ERP system of our times now. But interestingly, if you ask nearly all SAP customers, what always came up, as I mentioned, was they just wanted to have an improved usability. So if you would have actually asked these customers, they say, if you just give me a better front end, I would be fine. But actually, SAP said, well, it's not just a new front end. You have to go through a profound transformation, to a substantial transformation journey. And I'm convinced that with these new data structures, with these new analytical capabilities, with all this, let's say, new innovation platform, the customers are much better off in being competitive towards the future. However, since customers didn't like to have it in the first place, they now feel a bit pressured. And it's not that they are, let's say, free in deciding, but at a certain moment in time, their current ERP system is basically out of date, will not be supported anymore. And if you look at it from an end user perspective, if you once bought a car, you don't want that your car manufacturer is telling you as of next year, you can't drive your car anymore. So I can understand that this feeling of being pressured is with the customers there.
Should they feel like this? Should they feel pressured?
Well, actually, if you look from a distance, my opinion is no one should need to be pressured from that. Fact is, the old the outdated SAP ERP system is just not a platform where you can innovate around it, and so customers should more approach it from that. So there are these dates, which I already mentioned, of 2027 and 2030 flying around. And it's not that this is the, let's say, heavy deadline that everyone is looking or should be afraid of. It's more, do you want as a customer, as an SAP customer, work on your old SAP system in 2027, not being able to communicate with mobile devices with your ERP system, not being able to have a state-of-the-art front end, not being able to process large amounts of data, not being able to be flexible and communicate with other customers. I think that's actually the question. And I'm very open. If you have only these, let's say, more or less artificial deadlines by the end of maintenance as a trigger for the transformation journey, this is probably not going to be enough then to make this transformation successful from a motivational perspective. So I think what we now see is that a lot of customers have these 15, 20-year-old systems. And of course, these systems, they become increasingly costly and also are really impediments in the growth. And often these types of elements, what you cannot do because you are on such an old system, these are much more important. And so therefore, this is why customers should feel pressured, but not because of SAP, but more because they are on an outdated system that will not be able to tackle the challenges of the future.
Okay. And if you look at the market, where are we with the move to S4HANA?
That's always a question that a lot of customers ask myself. So since I'm really one of the people from the first hours and still working back then for SAP, I can definitely disclose that SAP had originally in mind that the adoption would be much faster. So the first time that SAP basically defined the end of maintenance was then with an end of December 2025. And everyone thought that basically when starting in 2015, 10 years would be enough to basically migrate the majority of the SAP systems. But actually this assessment or this idea turned out to be not correct. The projects were much more difficult. I mentioned it at an earlier place. The systems actually created their own life once they were installed at the customer. Also, what has been really different than we actually anticipated is that every customer is actually having their own system with an own target idea where they want to go to. And therefore, every project is also fundamentally different. Then, of course, we had also in the first releases, 2015, 2016, also 2017, even serious functional shortcomings. So in the very beginning, and that was really something that people didn't see coming, some of the shortcomings made the decision of not going to S4HANA, and they kind of kept being around as a rumor, in a sense of S4HANA is not mature enough and they can't cover this scenario in manufacturing, for example, where we faced quite some shortcomings for quite a while. Of course, this is all long ago, but these rumors from back 2016-17 are still around. And so there was quite a slow adoption in the very beginning. And then, and then there came COVID, huh? Mm-hmm. So there is absolutely, it's not a secret that the projects which were carried out during COVID were often not successful or took much longer than expected. People couldn't come together, project teams could not come together. And of course, then we also had other black swan events like we have now the Ukraine war, uncertainties, geopolitical uncertainties, which basically also moved the priorities within companies to other projects. Of course, it is much more important to have an, let's say, working supply chain and having the production line still up and running than to focus on an S4 system migration. But of course, it's like a problem at home. You can ignore it for quite some while, but at a certain moment in time, it becomes pressing. So with all these events, we actually, in fact, lost quite some time. Many companies lost quite some time, that they are now increasingly facing the situation that they are with a system that, again, received the last update in 2016 and will not receive any future upgrade. And so that maybe in the summary was one of the reasons why, or some of the reasons why this adoption was rather slow. Maybe last but not least on that one, we also had a number of, let's say, communications by SAP which really did not help. So some people really were still in this S4HANA transformations, and then there came the announcement that actually the future will be S4HANA in the cloud. So some customers were basically confronted after a successful project with an S4 system in their data center that SAP told them certain scenarios will not run on their system, despite the fact that they just migrated to the brand new system, because there was the clear push from SAP that RISE, the private cloud environment of SAP, will be the only way that you can really consume all kinds of new innovations. So that also didn't land well, and also sometimes simply creates confusion or hesitation whether it's now the right time to move. So maybe going into a couple of nuances, so some differentiations. If you have bought the license, that doesn't mean that you have started your S4HANA project. And of course, when we look at the numbers also, we see that the numbers of the sold licenses are quite high. So it's quite difficult actually today to really assume or to really say how many clients are actually already on S4HANA. And so with that in mind, you have another difficulty. If you take a large customer who has multiple SAP systems, if they are live with one system and they are with one system on S4HANA, they still have a long way to go, despite the fact that they are also already using S4. And that actually brings us to a situation of the adoption, coming back to your question, Faisal, that from all the 35,000 SAP ERP customers who have bought at a certain moment in time a license and are running that, we have only 32% of them that have bought the S4HANA license. These values are now, let's say, back to early 2023, that they might be a bit higher. So 1/3 of the customers have bought the license. We have another 25% which are live with their system, but a lot of them have more than one system. So we see today only around 15% that are fully live with all their SAP systems on S4HANA. And that's, of course, well, not a lot if you see that we are almost 10 years down the road. We see, of course, that all kinds of new customers who now are moving to an SAP solution, they are, of course, starting with S4HANA. So already for many, many years, we do not see any SAP ERP systems anymore. And of course, despite the fact that we have at the moment only, let's say, very few customers who are fully on S4HANA, we see on the other hand side that the pace and the increase of project is tremendous. So over the last year, it was staggering to see how many customers embarked on new projects, how much interest there are. Probably people also realized, okay, now we are in 2024. On the one hand side, the end of the solution comes closer, whether we believe in the actual dates or not. But on the other hand side, the delta to my 2016 latest update is also becoming bigger and bigger. So also the step towards S4 is much more important to take into consideration. And usually also my management is saying, like, folks, we need to hire people who want to go into innovation. Do they really have to work with these old solutions? Or also, is it okay to start a project on my old platform knowing that I probably need to throw everything away? So we now see really a complete shift in the market. And of course, we see that in the meantime, many people have bought the license, but only now we see the actual momentum kicking off in the projects. And there we will also come back later for all in migration projects, so upgrade projects and so-called bluefields. But that is certainly for a later episode.
That sounds promising. You have mentioned the SAP ball game going forward in the previous episode. Can you summarize it a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah. So SAP itself as an organization is in full transition from a software provider to a cloud company. There's no question around. That's what analysts expect. That's what investors expect. And so the underlying big number of people that also basically are now asked to leave the company on the one hand side, but also at the same time, the big number of new positions that are currently created definitely also show that. So that's the first point. Second, the success of the past with the installations of their software at many organizations becomes now a biggest of challenge. Huh? Remember, we said actually every single SAP installation is one of its kind. And so needs to find a specific way on how to get this one to S4HANA. And so that's definitely a big challenge. That's number two. The new S4HANA is not running on any database anymore. So S4HANA, as the name says, requires an underlying HANA database. This comes with many, many advantages, but it also cuts into the revenue stream of the Oracles, the IBMs, and the Microsoft, which in the past have provided the SAP ERP. So SAP takes more, let's say, share of the market, including the database. But also, of course, they even want to go one step further, that the system is not only running on their technology, but basically also within their own walls, within their data centers or the data centers of their partners. So next to the solution of the S4HANA itself, SAP also encourages their customers that the system will be in a subscription mode, and SAP becomes in a kind of a one-stop shop. We will dive into that in a later episode where we then also go into the details of the sub-RISE model for the private cloud or the sub-GROW model for the public cloud. But the bottom line is that SAP will remain relevant and the key player in the ERP market, certainly over the next decade, which is also underlined by the fact that only few organizations have succeeded to move away from SAP to another ERP solution. And I can, from my own experience, tell you that many organizations have asked the questions. And yes, we do have ongoing projects where, for example, customers try to go to a Microsoft solution or to an Oracle solution. But for the time now, we only see that in very, very few cases that it succeeds, and the ones which are still in progress still have to prove that this is going to be successful. What is certainly the case is that the price that they pay for moving comes with a questionable benefit, because the new solution, the S/4HANA solution, is definitely very, very competitive. So at the bottom line also, for the adoption, the S/4HANA had a very slow start for the reasons mentioned already before, but is now really in full speed with one single huge challenge, that the projects which basically require a number of experts are so massive that the available resources in the market cannot keep up with it. So this is certainly one of the key attentions that we will see going forward, because if you actually want to contribute to such a project, you need to have 2 or 3 implementations under your belt. That means anyone who is having less than 2-3 years experience will not be able to completely independently run their area of responsibility on the one hand side. And if this would not be enough, we also see that a couple of people, after very heavy SAP S/4HANA implementations, also to decide to simply leave the domain. So that brings this whole resource part under huge constraints and scrutiny. So I think that's probably in a nutshell, in a big nutshell, coconut shell probably, the bottom line of where we are with the SAP ballgame at the moment.
Thank you to summarize this topic. But yeah, so many questions I still have for you. But I guess we should call it an episode for now, and ask our listeners to hit the subscribe button so they get informed when the next episode will be available. Torsten, you will dive in the different types of customers and how that matters when approaching the S/4HANA transformation. So much looking forward to it.